$212 in back taxes. Listen, Tom, we can make this easy. Pay online by June 18th, and we'll skip your penalty and take half off your interest. Because, Tom, we do know who you are.
It's not a stretch of the imagination. In fact, it's already beginning to happen where people are being given RFID chips so that we can, scan you. Now, they always try to present a good reason for doing that. Well, we'll have your entire medical history. If you fall down unconscious, the doctors will know who you are, what drugs you're allergic to. They'll be able to treat you more efficiently because they have all this information. Well, the opposite is also true. If the government has all this information on you, they can also manipulate you by the use of that information. You won't be allowed to get a job. You won't be allowed to buy food. You won't be allowed to, perform any economic transactions unless you have the government RFID chip and are approved. This is one of the things that people have been worried about for a long time. The technology now exists.
In March 2010, the Obama administration declassified details about the Bush cybersecurity program. The program, initiated by National Security Presidential Directive 54, needs to evolve and become part of an even broader national cybersecurity strategy, according to President Obama. With the population concerned about intrusion, Obama has tried to assure Americans that the government will not monitor private sector networks and internet traffic. Yet part of the program is to enhance awareness of network weaknesses and threats on the federal level, to eventually include state, local, and even private sector. Wired reported what may be of the most concern, especially from an already over-intrusive government, is the need for government to define its roles in protecting private critical infrastructure networks. That infrastructure includes internet service providers, as well as telecommunications, banking, and other networks. It should be noted that the very governmental department that is responsible for cybersecurity, CERT, the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team, has been found to have hundreds of holes within its own security system. In the report on the vulnerabilities, it states that the proper security measures have not been implemented on the mission operating environment that would protect data from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction. It might be of interest to note that the agency, founded in 2003 and part of the Department of Homeland Security, is also considered a public-private partnership, like the Federal Reserve.
What is really worrying about a group like the Oath Keepers is this is a group of people who are armed by the rest of society. In the case of police officers, these are people who sometimes have the power of life and death over you or me. And what that means is if these men and women are animated by ideas that are completely false, completely paranoid and groundless, you've got to worry about who they're going to see as the real enemy and what kinds of decisions they make in stressful situations. When you look at the Oath Keepers website, the core of it is this business about the orders they're not going to obey. And it starts out with a preamble, a quote from George Washington saying, now is the time, or soon comes the time when it will be determined whether we're slaves or freedmen. Immediately after that, the Oath Keepers website says, presumably in Stuart Rhodes's words, that time is near at hand again.
Southern Poverty Law Center. Heidi Byrick, one of my favorite people. She's a director of special projects. Had her on my radio show several times. And we enjoy each other's company. We talk, we have a good time, but she knows my position, and she knows I understand hers. The reason that she is against Oath Keepers is because they made it clear that they wouldn't follow orders. Really.
Oath Keepers, primarily former military people, are acknowledging this is what the Constitution says. We were trained, as we went through military training, that it was our responsibility to deny an unconstitutional order. So presumably you'd have to be smart enough to know what was and was not a constitutional order. And so they have a list of 10 of them.
Well, it's a declaration of orders, and the whole point of it is to, one, draw some lines in the sand ahead of time, and get the current serving military to think about where their line in the sand is. But it's also a reflection of our own Bill of Rights. And so when I read through them, you'll see that, oh, okay, it's mostly a restatement of the Bill of Rights. The first one is we will not obey orders to disarm the American people. And of course we had gun disarmament during Katrina. It was a big catalyst for why I started Oath Keepers. But it's also, it's number one on our list, not because firearms and gun ownership is more important than any other part of the Bill of Rights or any other part of our natural rights, but it's because that's the one thing that's more likely to lead to fighting. Second one is we will not obey orders to conduct warrantless searches of the American people. And what that's evoking is, once again, our Fourth Amendment, which was a response to the colonial history of the writs of assistance, which were warrantless searches or general warrants. It's one of the first causes of resistance among the American population back in 1763. We will not obey orders to detain American citizens as unlawful enemy combatants or to subject them by military tribunal. And the reason why that is there is that post 9/11 in particular, there has been a steady drumbeat and argument coming from the executive branch and backed up by the Supreme Court, unfortunately, that argues that the president can detain American citizens as unlawful combatants in the war on terror and treat them as though they were a foreign enemy, as though they were an Iraqi or an Afghani during the war on terror. So number four is we will not obey orders to impose martial law or a state of emergency on a state. And what this is a reflection of our dual sovereignty system. The Constitution sets up a new national government, but as the 10th Amendment makes clear, reserves to the states and the people all powers not granted. And number five is we will not invade and subjugate any state that asserts its sovereignty. And that's closely related to number four. Because we have, under our Constitution, a dual sovereignty system reserving to the states and the people all powers not granted, that is part of the Constitution we all swore to defend. And so we will not use military force or obey orders to use military force against a state that is simply asserting its constitutionally respected sovereignty and standing on that and defending that principle. And number six is we will not obey orders to blockade American cities, thus turning them into giant detention camps. And this is something that, of course, a lot of critics say, well, wait a minute, when's that ever going to happen? Well, historically that happened in the Warsaw ghettos. And that's one of the things that we've done is say, look, not only do we have the history that the founders reflected in our Bill of Rights, but we also have the 20th century experience, what was done by the Nazis, was done by Stalin and his gulags. And one of the things the Nazis did is that they cordoned off a large section of Warsaw and detained the Jews there and used that as a detention center. All they had to do was blockade it off and post armed guards and post concertina wire around it, and then they starved them out. They tried to starve them to death. Okay, number seven is we will not obey orders to force Americans into any form of detention camp under any pretext. And this is once again a reflection of our own experience in the 20th century. As we saw what happened in Nazi Germany, we saw what happened in Stalinist Russia, we saw what happened with Pol Pot in Cambodia. You had people who were forced into detention centers. And even in our own history, the sad history during World War II of American citizens of Japanese descent being rounded up, over 100,000 of them were interned in detention camps in California, Arizona, Oregon, and Washington State. This was done by executive order by FDR, and it was carried out by the military generals, General DeWitt on the Western Command, And so we had that precedent, even in our own history. Number eight is we will not obey any orders to use foreign troops on U.S. soil to keep the peace or maintain control. And the reason why this is on this list is in the founders' experience, it was the use of foreign mercenaries, the Hessians, which was one of the more grievous affronts and led to the Declaration of Independence, quite frankly. They had, even during the fighting after April 19, 1775, there was still hope they could reconcile and remain part of the British Empire. But when the Crown used foreign troops on them, that's when they drew a line and said this is just so outrageous. It's one of the reasons why they separated. Number nine is we will not obey orders to confiscate the property of the American people, including food and other essential supplies. And once again, this is a recognition and reflection of the fact that denial of food has been used as a weapon in warfare for thousands of years. It's also a reflection of the asserted authority of the president to confiscate property and confiscate food. There's been many executive orders since the Cold War that assert this supposed power of the president to go and seize industries and seize supplies. And even had Truman seizing the steel mills during the Korean War, as it actually happened. And that was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court only because Congress had expressly declared that he couldn't do that. But it left open, wherever Congress has not said no, it's left open, an open question about whether a president can do these things. And so it almost affirmed that he can, under some circumstances, go and seize entire industries. Number 10 is we will not obey orders to infringe on the people's right to assembly, to freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom of religion, which is simply a reflection of our First Amendment protected guarantees of our rights to assemble and petition government for disagreements and freedom of speech and assembly. These are every bit as important as anything else. And even though it's number 10, it's as important as number 1. If you don't have freedom of speech and assembly, then you no longer have any peaceful recourse whatsoever for correction of government abuse. We have quite a few who have joined. Out of 10,000 current members we have right now, a fair number are active duty. But a lot of them are kind of staying under the radar because they're concerned about being purged or persecuted. And so I always tell them, don't worry. I don't care if you officially join or not. The main thing is you keep your oath. It's there as the antidote against obedience, blind obedience to the man on the white horse, whether he be a general, whether he be a president, whoever he is. And they understood that people will be tempted to go along and just do as they're told. This is just the tendency of men in uniform. So the oath is there as an antidote to make sure that it reminds them of their obligations.
Governments are notorious for creating panic to get public support for legislation and emergency measures that the population would not otherwise consider. The United States government is no different. Whether it concerns war with other nations, battling a disaster in our own country,